Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph. We're going to jump into our Black History fact for this week at the top of the episode, and then we'll get into our true crime case for today. Ernest Everett Just made significant contributions to Scientology, was a founder of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, and is recognized for his impact on Black history. Just's primary legacy involves his recognition of the cell's surface fundamental role in organism development. His approach in marine biology, cytology, and parthenogenesis emphasized studying whole cells under normal conditions rather than dissecting them in a lab. He championed the idea that all cell parts fully participate in development, which contrasted the emerging emphasis on genes. Ernest Everett Just is also celebrated for describing the wave of negativity spreading. In 1924, Just co-authored the textbook General Cytology. Ernest Just, along with Edgar Love, Oscar Cooper, and Frank Coleman, established the Omega Psi Phi fraternity at Howard University on November 17, 1911. Just helped to mediate controversy, and despite initial doubts from Howard's faculty and administration, Omega Psi Phi Alpha Chapter was chartered on December 15, 1911. Omega Psi Phi was incorporated under the laws of the District of Columbia on October 28, 1914. Ernest Everett Just is recognized as a trailblazing scientist and pioneer who overcame barriers faced by Black scholars in the early 20th century. In 2002, Malif Keet Asante included Just in his list of 100 greatest African Americans. The NAACP awarded Just the Spingarn Medal in 1915 for his scientific achievements and service to his race. The Medical University of South Carolina has hosted the annual Ernest E. Just Symposium since 2000 to encourage non-white students to pursue careers in biomedical sciences. Let's get into our true crime case for today.
So grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, and your wine if it's the evening. But either way, let's get into it. The title of our case for today is Lust, Lies, and a Lethal Affair. It's the tragic end of Lance Herndon. Lance was driven. He was the wake up at 4 a.m. type of guy. And as an entrepreneur and founder of Access Incorporated, he decided he would have his office to his company in the basement of his home in order to maximize the amount of hours that he worked in a day. You know, he was the typical type A personality, which meant that he thrived on routine. He would wake up in the morning, get dressed, and get to the basement by 5 a.m. to start working. I mean, this man was dedicated. But on August 8th, 1996, something was different. And when Holly, an employee of Access Incorporated, unlocked the doors to the office, she was surprised that her boss and founder of the company was not already sitting at his desk. Lance would leave a small cassette at each employee's desk, which provided each person with what they were to focus on for that day. Steph, this was so funny to me because I was like, cassettes? You know, that's kind of like a take you back type of thing.
Oh yeah, I mean cassettes are a throwback.
Yeah, I mean, they're even older than CDs. And so this is what Lance would do. And each employee would get that cassette and they would know what they needed to focus on that day. And as Holly turned on the lights in the basement, not only did she not see Lance at his desk, but those cassettes for each employee, they were also missing. This was highly unusual because, as I said, Lance was very type A. His absence and him deviating from his normal routine raised major red flags for her, and she immediately went into search mode for Lance. Now, Holly checked Lance's calendar to see, if he had any appointments out of the office that day, and maybe she just wasn't aware of it. So she didn't see anything on that calendar. She decided she was going to page him on his beeper several times, and she got no reply. Now, Jackie, Lance's mother, who also worked for Access Inc., arrived at the house around 10 in the morning, and Holly asked her if she spoke with Lance. And Jackie denied speaking or even hearing from Lance. So she immediately ran upstairs, so she left the basement because she's like, let me go find my son. She immediately ran upstairs to see where he was. And as she entered the upstairs part of the house, nothing looked out of normal to her. She called out to Lance and received no response. Then Jackie then approaches her son's bedroom and she knocks on the door and gets no answer. She slowly walks in. And she's likely feeling some unease at this moment as she approached the inside of his bedroom. And when she looked at the bed, she found her son laying in the bed, naked and bloody, with his face completely caved in, and she immediately let out a blood-curdling scream. It was apparent that her beloved son Lance was injured. She called 911 and she desperately cried for someone to come help her son. She said on that call, "Someone done killed my baby." But so many people wanted to know who would want Lance Herndon dead and why. This is what investigators were tasked with, identifying just who wanted Lance dead. The crime scene pointed to either a hit or a crime of passion. Nothing was immediately identified, as stolen. For example, his wallet and a wad of money was still sitting on the dresser. And we'll go into the more details of the crime scene later, but let's first talk about, and Steph, can you tell us a little bit more about who Lance was?
Lance Herndon was a 41-year-old successful millionaire entrepreneur. He founded the company Access Inc., which was a computer consulting firm that grew into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. His business achievements earned him national recognition, including an appointment to the 1995 White House Conference on Small Businesses by President Bill Clinton. Lance was recently divorced from his ex-wife, Janine Herndon. The two shared custody of their son, Harrison. Lance was dedicated to his work. He was a trailblazer for Black men in Atlanta. He was an entrepreneur by heart, and in a time where entrepreneurship was not the in thing, because it is now. Everybody's an entrepreneur, which God bless you. He looked for investments, and he was skilled at doing so. Lance's success was on the cusp of Atlanta being named the Black Mecca. Now, I want to stop here and discuss culture and what exactly is the Black Mecca, because, we throw around these terms, but we may not know what they mean. Atlanta became the Black Mecca there in the 1970s, actually, when Ebony Magazine coined it as the Black Mecca. But before Atlanta was known as this, other cities held the title. In the early 20th century, Harlem was the epicenter of Black excellence. I mean, you think about we're talking about Black history, right? So when you're thinking about Black excellence and Black history, you have to talk about the renowned era of the Harlem Renaissance, which there was just a group of Black people there. You had Langston Hughes, you had Zora Neale Hurston. I'm just naming some of the few that are just coming to my mind. But there was a lot of culture there, rich. I mean, the arts were booming. So was literature, music, political activism. It was all there in Harlem. But later, it then began to be Chicago and Washington, D.C. and Houston, Texas. Now, Houston, Texas is at the end of this, but we kind of want to focus on Atlanta. But by the late 20th century, one city stood out. And you guessed it, it's Atlanta. Atlanta's ascension as the Black Mecca is rooted in history. It's home to the nation's most prestigious historically Black colleges. We've talked about that here on Murder in the Black in our case before. But the AUC, right? And the AUC is known as Morehouse, Spelman, and Clark Atlanta. Atlanta has long nurtured Black intellectualism and have been one of the first to do so. During the Civil Rights Movement, the city earned its reputation as the city too busy to hate. I like that. What do you think about that, MD?
I think that is really fascinating. I didn't know that until we, dove a little deeper into the Black Mecca and Atlanta's rise to that. The city too busy to hate. It's like, it kind of, when you think about Atlanta, and really when you think about Atlanta back in the late 90s, early 2000s, that really is what it was. I mean, it makes sense.
You had leaders like Martin Luther King, John Lewis, Maynard Jackson, who propelled the city forward in political and economic empowerment. Maynard Jackson was elected in 1973 as Atlanta's first Black mayor. He revolutionized the city by ensuring Black businesses secured contracts, paving the way for generational wealth within the Black community. Interestingly, after Maynard Jackson was elected, all succeeding mayors have been Black. Like, he set the precedent, right? Including the most recently Andre Dickens, elected in 2022. Atlanta was officially coined the Black Mecca of the South, as I mentioned earlier, by Ebony Magazine in 1970. Black folks have more, live better, accomplish more, and deal with whites more effectively than they do anywhere else in the South or the North.
And by 1997, when Lance Herndon was experiencing success, Atlanta also received the status the new Mecca and the land of milk and honey for Blacks, due to the number of employment opportunities for Blacks in the city, with the best schools and most affordable housing for Blacks. Now, today, Atlanta remains a powerhouse for Black economic success. Just think of Tyler Perry. It boasts the highest number of Black millionaires per capita, major Black-owned enterprises, and a thriving entertainment industry, which is fueled by hip-hop and film production. It's a city where Black professionals, entrepreneurs, and creatives seem to flourish. From the booming real estate market to political influence, Atlanta continues to set the standard for Black prosperity across the country. But, Atlanta doesn't come without its controversy, being the Black Mecca, especially now in the late 2020s. Critics argue that while the city fosters success for the Black elite, there seems to be a disparity between the Black residents that face economic inequalities and housing insecurity and underfunded public schools. What they saw in the late 90s, early 2000s is not the same, as what we see now. There seems to be a large discrepancy between either you're really, really doing well in Atlanta or you're not. And there's not really a lot of middle ground. And so the question kind of remains, does Atlanta truly uplift all Black people or just a select few? Also, toward the end of the 2020s, and Steph can probably speak a little bit more to this, the Black Mecca has been coined as Houston. So while Atlanta was, the late 90s to early 2000s, here in these late 2000s, 2015 and on, it's really been Houston, Texas. Steph, do you want to speak to that?
I mean, Houston, can't speak for today because today's economy is different, right? But it has a lower cost of living. It's a lot more room for entrepreneurship. You can come down there and get a house. And a lot of Black people have flooded the market of Houston, and it has really become what Atlanta was in its prime. And so even in Atlanta now, like, there's not a whole lot of Black people actually living in the city of Atlanta, because, we can have a conversation about the cities on the outside, but we're talking about Atlanta. It's not the epicenter it once was, the city of Atlanta. And a lot of people have gone further down south to, or you could say west, to Texas. Houston and even Dallas is quickly becoming a place where Black people can come and flourish and really do what they were doing in the early 90s to mid 2000s.
Today, Atlanta's status as the Black Mecca is in question. In the late 90s, when this case took place, it was definitely the Black Mecca. And Black people like Lance saw extreme success and entered a world of riches and fame. And Lance's wealthy status made him popular with the ladies, and this popularity contributed to his divorce. Lance was a ladies' man, and he was unable to curb his appetite for women even after he said, "I do." As investigators began to study the crime scene photos and learn more about Lance, they became confident that this was less likely a paid hit and more likely a crime of passion.
Lance was found lying on his back in his bed, his face, head suffering catastrophic trauma, injury so severe that the survival was impossible. So that person was intending for him to die. There were 0 defense wounds, suggesting to police that he was attacked from behind, likely while he was asleep. The first blow kept him in an unconscious state. The ME determined that the murder weapon was likely a wrench, and detectives noticed that the only missing tool in Lance's toolbox was a 16-inch adjustable wrench. Based upon the blood splatter evidence, the ME determined that the person who killed Lance was straddling him as they struck him. Blood splatter covered both the right and left sides of the headboard and pillowcases, indicating a violent and frenzied attack. Yet, in stark contrast to the brutality of the assault, Lance's body had been carefully staged, which I think it speaks to the craftiness of whoever the perpetrator was, because to kill him with that amount of force and then go on to craft and meticulously stage his body, it just speaks to the fact that it was planned in my mind. What do you think about that, MD?
I totally agree. And I think it's gruesome. You have to be a special kind of person, and special not in a good way, to do something so heinous, right? To violently kill someone and then stage their body.
He was covered with his comforter, and his hands were deliberately folded over his chest in an eerie, almost peaceful position. Investigators discovered a pillowcase soaked in blood discarded in the toilet, suggesting an attempt to clean up evidence. Further supporting this theory, the shower was wet, leading police to believe that the killer had washed off before leaving the scene. Forensic teams collected and submitted hair follicles found in the bed and sheets for testing, searching for any clues that could link a suspect to the crime. Nearby, a picture frame featuring a woman in lingerie had been turned face down on the desk beside the bed, a detail that hinted at a possible connection between the murder and Lance's personal relationships. One of the most crucial clues regarding the time of death came from the bedroom's alarm clock. 3 clocks, 2 digital and 1 non-digital, had been mysteriously unplugged, with the non-digital clock frozen at exactly 4:10 a.m., giving the investigators an estimated time of the attack. Despite the gruesome scene, nothing of obvious value appeared to be stolen. Expensive television, silverware, Lance's wallet, as MD mentioned before, and credit cards were left untouched in plain sight on the dresser. There were no sign of forced entry, suggesting that the killer either had a key or was willingly let inside. However, an observant employee, Holly, noticed that Lance's IBM's office laptop was missing, and although its carrying case was still in the home, this was highly unusual, as Lance never left his office without taking the laptop in its case. Investigators suspected the missing laptop could hold key information about the motive for this murder. Outside detectives found a strange and seemingly insignificant clue: silver gum wrappers scattered around the driveway near the garage. While small, the detail hinted that the killer might have lingered at the scene before or after the attack. One crucial piece of evidence remained missing: the murder weapon. Despite an extensive search, police were unable to find an object at the scene that could have been used to inflict the fatal blows. The lack of weapon only deepened the mystery, leaving investigators to wonder who had a reason to kill Lance, and what exactly were they trying to hide.
We're going to go down the list of the women that the police really dug deeper into, but I want to be clear before we do. Lance was talking to multiple women, and we're not going to cover all of them. We're going to cover the ones that the police really highly suspected and really focused their efforts on. So the ex-wife, Janine Herndon. Now, as with most investigations, the finger is almost always pointed at the spouse or the ex-spouse first. So we're going to start with Janine. To investigators, Janine stood the most to gain from Lance's death. He had a large life insurance policy that was worth $750,000, and it was in her name, even after their divorce. Janine and Lance had met in Brazil, and they, always lovingly talked about how they met under the statue of Christ. She was a flight attendant, and they were both on a layover, so they were just kind of, having some time in Brazil before their next flight. And she saw him first, and she approached him first, and the rest was history. Lance confided in his friends that he just immediately considered Janine to be marriage material. She was poised, confident, and sweet, and she adored Lance. But shortly after their marriage, he cheated on her time and time again. And she finally had her feel of being cheated on after their son Harrison was born, and she initiated the divorce between the two after 6 years of marriage, and she moved out. Investigators knew that Janine had access to Lance's house, and she also knew the security code. She used to live there, in fact. So she would be familiar with how to get around, and the fact that the picture frame of the other woman was turned over at the crime scene hinted that maybe Janine was some sort of a scorned ex who, could probably commit this crime. However, as they dug deeper into Janine, what they found was that she was not hostile to Lance at all. In fact, they co-parented well. Steph, what do you think about that?
I mean, that makes sense because I think she's been with him. She knows he's a playboy. Like, she's lived that life.
Right.
And so she let it go because she was like, this can't work. And some people, like it or not, they can be amicable about their divorce and say, especially, you would like to think that most people can, but with their child, they had to raise the child together. So I think she knew him and was like, I'm good on you.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's exactly what it was, Steph, because not only did they learn that they were amicable and they were co-parenting well, Janine had moved on. Janine was dating a new guy, and he was, in fact, her alibi. She was at home on a date with this new guy, and investigators were able to quickly dismiss Janine as their suspect. And what they soon learned later is that not only was it an amicable relationship, but like Lance actually supported her monthly. Like, he gave her a monthly spousal support. So she really did not yes, she was going to get this $750,000, but she was benefiting from him being alive.
So our next person is Kathy Collins. She's the woman in the picture frame. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, I just hit to do that. And she wasn't just another romantic interest in Lance's life. She was the primary girlfriend at the time of his murder. However, despite this title, their relationship was far from stable. Lance and Collins met at an industry party while they were both married to other people. Despite the affair, Lance reportedly could not help himself when it came to lavishly spending on Kathy. She had moved from the West Coast to Atlanta to be with him, and although she didn't officially live in his home, she had moved many of her belongings in and stayed there frequently. To the outside world, she was his glamorous plus one at public events, an elegant, well-dressed woman who fit seamlessly into Atlanta's upscale social scene. But those close to Lance speculated that she was more interested in his wealth than in building a future with him. In the weeks leading up to his murder, their relationship appeared to be cooling off. Lance seemed to be pulling away, and there were questions whether Kathy had discovered that he was seeing other women. Investigators wondered, could jealousy have played a role in his death, which, by everything that we know, more than likely it seemed like it did, maybe. Unless the perpetrator was just trying to get us off their scent. Who knows? When police questioned Kathy, her reaction raised suspicion. She didn't appear upset about Lance's murder. Instead, she seemed primarily concerned with retrieving her belongings from the crime scene. Just 6 days after his death, she sent a formal letter to the police demanding her personal property, items including sunglasses, clothing, and bottles of Merlot. Kathy, you trying to get the bottles of Merlot, girl? What you gonna do?
Kathy, do you even care that this man is dead? Like, what it appeared to me, Steph, is that Kathy and Lance had an understanding. Like, and whether that understanding was like we sat down and had a conversation, or Kathy just realized this is never gonna be anything more than what it was. It started out on bad foundation. We were both married.
Yeah.
And it's never going to turn around. Whatever it was, it just seemed like they had an understanding of this is all it is and all it will ever be. But Kathy, can we just appreciate the fact that somebody died? No, even if you don't love this man. Like,
said, I need the bottles of Merlot, baby.
Give me these bottles.
So that seemed odd and a detached response obviously made investigators scratch their head and wanted to look into her further. But after they did so, they found out that Kathy had an alibi, similar to that of his ex-wife. She claimed that on the night of the murder, she traveled to see another man she had started dating, and he corroborated her story. While there was no direct evidence linking Kathy Collins to the crime, her behavior and deteriorating nature of her relationship with Lance left some questions for investigators.
But they continue to move on because that's what they have to do. If they don't have the evidence isn't pointing to somebody, so they got to keep questioning. And there were many other people to question. So the police continued to question more women in Lance's life, and there were many other women to question. And so they approached Talana Caraway, and she was friends with Lance with a complicated past. She had known Lance for over a decade, and their relationship had fluctuated between friendship and romance. Their connection began when Talana worked as a bank teller, and Lance, the ever charismatic businessman, approached her at the bank and started to flirt with her while he was making his deposits. And then he later sent her flowers and asked her to lunch, and their relationship soon turned intimate. However, Talana never considered Lance to be her boyfriend, despite their occasional romantic involvement. And, when I heard Talana's initial story, I questioned, are you saying that in hindsight, or are you saying that's how you always peeped their relationship? You know what I'm saying, Steph?
And more than likely, it's more so hindsight. Really, this was nothing.
Right.
And, who knows her? Outside of what she's saying, we don't truly know, but hindsight is all. You always see better after everything's happened.
Absolutely. And over the years, Lance did provide financial assistance to Talana, even loaning money to help her pay off her car. He also allowed her to work for him part-time when she needed extra income. Now, this arrangement of the part-time work is what placed her in his home office on the night of his murder, which made her the last known person to see him alive. Now, that evening on August 8th, 1996, Talana had been working alone, handling data entry and making calls. She saw Lance a few times during the night, and she noted that he was in a good mood, excited about this new woman he had recently met. Now, Lance never told her the name of this new woman, but he did tell her she was new. And at one point, he even asked Talana to help him write a sweet card for this new romantic interest. During the night, Talana explained to investigators that she had answered a call from a woman that was trying to reach Lance, but told her that he wasn't available. That woman called back later that night, and she still wasn't able to speak with Lance, which really frustrated the woman. Talana didn't know who this woman was, the name of the woman. She didn't care to get all that information. I think she tried to get that information. The woman wouldn't give it to her. And she just kind of noted that was odd. Later in the night, as Talana was leaving, she saw Lance moving Kathy's clothes from the main bedroom to a hall closet, which signaled to her that he was distancing himself from Kathy, or maybe somebody was coming over and he didn't want them to see Kathy's belongings. Now, Lance, the ever gentleman, because that's who he is, charismatic in every way, called Talana close to midnight to make sure that she had made it home safely. And phone records confirmed this call, along with multiple calls from an unknown woman named Dion, who repeatedly asked for Lance that night. So the police were able to, although Talana did not know who the woman was calling, the police were able to confirm that it was this woman named Dion. The next morning, as Talana was getting into the shower, the police were banging on her door, and rather than immediately answering their questions, she called her attorney and set up a meeting before speaking with them. She didn't even answer the door. She was just like, y'all gonna bang on this door, and you can even know that I'm in here, but I'm not answering. I'm gonna call my attorney. And this resulted in the investigators really finding her suspicious, because that's not typical behavior. And I'm just going to say that while it's not typical behavior, it's actually the right behavior. So good job, Talana. But physical evidence from the crime scene added to the mystery of who really committed this crime, because the hair follicles and the trace DNA that was collected from Lance's fingernails, although they didn't indicate a sign of a struggle, what it did do was show that Talana, Kathy, and Janine were not a match. And so the police were able to definitively rule them out as suspects. And so although Talana had a long and complicated relationship with Lance, and it even was kind of odd that she called her attorney, police, it was able to effectively rule her out as a suspect.
Deanna Ball was one of Lance's romantic partners, entanglements, if you will. She was 27 years old. She was Jamaican born, and she was an executive assistant at MARTA Transportation. Dion was married to an airplane pilot and had a daughter with her husband, who was frequently out of town. She lived a double life, secretly engaging in an affair with Lance. Unlike some of his other girlfriends, Dion aggressively pursued Lance, even maneuvering her way into his 41st birthday party by asking her boss to secure her an invitation. Once she entered his world, he showered her with expensive gifts, including leasing a silver Mercedes for her. However, she soon became possessive and jealous, growing frustrated when she realized she wasn't the only woman in Lance's life. Which, girl, okay, yeah. She loved him, obviously.
But you weren't the only woman in Lance's life, and that's a whole thing, right? We all understand that's clearly a problem for Lance. But, honey, you were married.
Yeah, she didn't catch the memo. That's okay. When questioned by police, Dion cried as she spoke about Lance, claiming they were in love. She said that on the night of the murder, he stopped by her house to loan her his IBM laptop for schoolwork between 9 and 10:30 p.m. However, that contradicted Talina Caraway's statement, as Talina was in Lance's office late that night and said he was still there when she left. Investigators believe they had caught Dion in a lie, but at the time, they lacked the evidence to charge her. As detectives explored other suspects, they eliminated Lance's ex-wife, as MD just said, Kathy Collins, and Talina Caraway, based on the alibis and the DNA evidence. However, they could not rule out Dion. Adding to their suspicions, they discovered that a month before his murder, Lance had called 911 to report a trespasser. Dion. Witnesses said she was banging on his door with a knife, peering through his windows, and saw Kathy Collins inside. She was arrested for trespassing, and ironically, the day Lance was found murdered, Dion was supposed to appear in court for those charges. Detectives wondered if Dion feared Lance wouldn't help her escape the legal troubles that she landed herself in, and out of an act of desperation, she went ahead and murdered him. But with no physical evidence linking her directly to the crime, the case stalled for over a year.
A year and a half later, a major breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dion's own husband. During their divorce proceeding, Dion reportedly told him that she would kill him the same way she had killed Lance. While this statement was alarming, prosecutors needed more concrete evidence to bring charges against her. So the investigators decided that they were going to attend Dion's divorce proceedings to see if maybe she said anything in those proceedings that contradicted what she had testified to them before, which would allow them to basically arrest her. While she's testifying in her divorce case under oath, Dion claims that her relationship with Lance had been purely platonic, painting him as nothing more than a mentor. However, when pressed, she admitted that she had gone to his house that night to retrieve the laptop, which directly contradicted her earlier claims to the investigators that he had brought it to her. One of the biggest things for the investigators were they could never pin that she was at the crime scene. She always said that she wasn't there, and they could not definitively rule out that she was at his house that night. And so now, under oath, she says, not only, hey, me and Lance were just friends, which clearly she had told the investigators she was so in love with him. He bought her a Mercedes. She was his girlfriend. She's saying under oath that these divorce proceedings, no, we were just strictly platonic. He was just my mentor. And yeah, I did go over to his house that night because I picked up the laptop from him, but then I left. So now the investigators have exactly what they need. And, fearing that Dion may flee the country after her divorce, the investigators acted quickly. They got a warrant for her arrest. And as soon as she stepped out of the courthouse, they arrested her for Lance's murder. And after years of dead ends, authorities finally felt like they had their prime suspect behind bars. Let's kind of dig into what their case was, what the prosecution felt like they had. Now, they did face an uphill battle because there was no direct evidence linking Dion to Lance's murder. There was no murder weapon. They never found that wrench. Although they believed that it was the wrench, they never found it. There was no fingerprints and there were no eyewitnesses. However, they did build their case on circumstantial evidence and motive. And that is enough, friends. That is simply enough. I know that when we watch cases, we feel like you have to have the DNA, you have to have the trace evidence, but circumstantial evidence and motive is simply enough as long as that you're able to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's what the prosecutors attempted to do. And they did that through painting Dion as this greedy and jealous person. And they said, she's an opportunistic woman who killed Lance in a fit of rage after realizing that he was not going to commit to her. They argued that she was materialistic and she was obsessed with his wealth, and she killed him before stealing from him. And the prosecutor, he had a theme, and his theme was he called the 3 C's. And he highlighted Dion's possession of 3 significant items that belonged to Lance. One was the computer. It was Lance's IBM laptop that was missing and that Dion later admitted to having. And so they pointed to, like, she had access to this. After she killed him, she stole this computer. And then they talked about how she had his credit cards and how she used these credit cards, friends, to purchase dining room furniture the next morning after killing him. So she literally steals from him. She kills him, steals from him, and purchases expensive dining room furniture. And then she also had the car, right? Which she had wrote a letter. They were able to show that she had actually drafted a letter that she kept in her possession. It was unsigned, and it stated that Lance had lended her his Mercedes-Benz, and his estate was to transfer the Mercedes-Benz from his name to her name in the event of his death. And so she had this unsigned letter that they were able to prove was in her handwriting in his car, because it was his car that she was allowing him to drive. The physical evidence that they had, they had some, but it was sparse, right? So they did find 2 hairs at the crime scene that were a match to Dion. Now, the DNA that they found under Lance's fingernails, it was a 1 in 100 billion match to Dion as well, which is strong forensic evidence that, pointed to her having something to do with Lance in the days leading up to his death. They were not able to point to a degree of medical certainty on the timing of when that DNA was found under his nails. Does that make sense, Steph?
Yeah, I mean, because her lawyer could easily say, well, she was with him, she had sex with him the day before, or that day earlier, or it's because stuff stays in between your fingernails sometimes, even when you wash and clean. That's easily debatable.
Exactly. And so while it was strong forensic evidence for the prosecution, it wasn't going to land a home run, right? And then they also pointed to the gum wrappers that they found outside of Lance's home, which matched the ones that were found in Dion's purse when they arrested her.
Well, let's get into the defense's case. Dion's team argued that the police had rushed to judgment, ignoring other potential suspects in Lance's complex love life. They pointed out multiple secret relationships. Lance had several girlfriends, any of whom could have been involved. unidentified evidence, 2 of the hairs found in his bed did not match Dion or any of the women the police interviewed. Witnesses testified that Lance often left his girlfriend's use of his laptop and credit cards, making Dion's possessions of them unsurprising. Like, hey, he let everybody do that. If you were with him, he was down to fund the good time. There was no blood on Dion's clothing, belongings, or car, raising doubts about whether she had been on the scene during the murder, because that was a very bloody crime scene. So there would have been some blood transfer. Dion was found guilty of murder and theft. And I want to spend a little time here, MD, because based on all of the evidence that we laid out, I want to ask you guys this question and drop it in our Instagram post. Do you think, based on everything we just presented, that you could have found her guilty?
There is some reasonable doubt. I don't know how, you're hearing this, and unfortunately, you're not able to be in the moment. And I think that matters, right? Like sitting in the juror seat with the defense and the prosecution arguing. I think that the prosecution has strong circumstantial evidence. Dion lied. I think that would have, when I sitting there listening to all the lies that they were able to catch Dion in, how she lied to the police in the beginning, how she changes her story under oath during her divorce proceedings, the hairs that were found there, and, just even her writing that letter that just seems so suspicious. Even if Lance had said, yes, I will do this for you, go ahead and draft the letter, it just seems very suspicious. But I do think that having additional hairs in Lance's bed that were not able to point to any of the women that the police or that we delineated, right? So not Kathy, not Janine, not Talena as well. It almost makes you wonder, well, dang, Lance, it could have been another woman that the police just did not question. Could it have been? But then it makes you also go back and say, but none of those women had his computer. None of those women had the credit cards. None of those women, were at the crime scene. She literally put herself at the crime scene, right? So we know Talena was at the crime scene, right? She was there. But we also have phone records that show that Talena was at home during the time that the crime was committed. We know that Dion was at his house prior to the murder. I guess that doesn't really answer the question. I think that I can see somebody saying that there's reasonable doubt, but I also see how you get to a guilty verdict here.
2 years later, in 2003, her conviction was overturned due to improper hearsay evidence admitted by detectives during the trial. In a second trial, the jury became hopelessly deadlocked at 11-1 in favor of guilt, resulting in a mistrial. As prosecutors prepared for a third trial, a key special agent had passed away, and Lance's mother did not want to endure another lengthy court battle. The DA ultimately offered Dion a plea deal, and in September of 2004, she pled guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 10 years in prison with an additional 10 years of probation. Dion was released on parole in July of 2011 after serving most of her sentence at Pulaski State Prison in Georgia. Since her release, she has remained out of the public eye, focusing on rebuilding her life.
The takeaways in this case. I have 2 takeaways, and Steph, I just kind of want to get your thoughts on them. I think that there is power in material greed, right? When you focus on just wanting to have, and you see wealth and you see dollar signs and you see all the things that you can attain. And I think that Dion in this case underscores how financial motives can drive someone to extreme actions, like her maybe being fearful that all of that she was gonna lose access to all of that. If she had to go face these trespassing charges, or even just realizing that she was never going to have Lance completely, much like Janine recognized, right, being married to him, and that led to this slippery slope of her getting angry, violent, and reacting in such a extreme way. I mean, what are your thoughts behind that?
I think a lot of times we get ourselves into a situation, and then once we in it, we're like, oh man, this is more than what I initially signed up for. And for Dion, I think that's what happened. She got caught up in the rapture of all that Lance was, all that he stood for, all that he could provide, and she really fell in love with him. Because only crazy love, let me put the emphasis on crazy, is gonna make you drive to somebody's house, knock on their door, beat on it, look in the window with a knife in your hand. She was really crazy in love, and she probably thought, I can handle being the sideline because I'm married too, and I a lot of times you think you can handle those things on an intellectual level, but emotions drive us, man, more than we like to think. It can drive you and lead you into the wrong direction. I think she just got more than what she could handle and snap.
I think also a takeaway from me is the fragility of success, because Lance built an empire from the ground up. Kudos to him. We talked about that. He was the epitome of what it meant to get that coined phrase, the Black Mecca, and just what that meant. He really, demonstrated how to pull yourself up from your bootstraps and just earn, accolades for your financial success. However, you just see that even despite all of the success that he had, his personal decisions, including these like multiple relationships that he had, still ended up contributing to his downfall. He was so super successful. And although we didn't really touch on this much, he was experiencing a lot of financial debt at the time of his murder. But I just kind of think, as I read about that, like, Lance was the kind of guy that was going to pivot. He was the kind of guy that was going to find other investments. He had already done that in some way. He had partnered with one of his friends who recognized that Atlanta was on the cusp of becoming this hip hop scene, and they had went and got a club, and although the club was only around for a couple of years and started to end up like not seeing the success that they hoped for, Lance was just the kind of guy that was going to find ways to make his money make money. That's just the kind of guy that he was. He was going to find the deals that were going to be successful. And yet, despite all of that, despite the success that he had in his business and career life, he made such pitiful decisions in his personal life, involving himself with multiple relationships that ended up causing multiple women to have a motive to even kill him, possibly. I mean, the fact that the police had to go through multiple women and identify, you had a reason to kill him, and you had a reason to kill him, and you had a reason to probably want him dead, is almost like, dang. It's just crazy. Success is, what is it really? And it makes you really think about it. Like, is it just simply the financial and the monetary, means, or is it more than that? And, so I think that's, my takeaway in this case.
We want to know what you guys think about Lance and his ultimate demise in this case. We want you guys to drop that in our Instagram post, because that's where we have a lot of good conversation. We want to remind you that we do have a giveaway going on, and I got a couple of questions, and I will also post this for you guys to just know going forward. What do we mean by share? Where do you share? You can share on your Facebook, and by that mean just simply screenshot Murder in the Black, tag us on your post. You can make an actual post, or you can just put us in your stories, whether that be on Facebook or Instagram, and then just tag us. That gives you an opportunity to participate. It enters you into the giveaway. Now, for the second part of that, if you want to do anything else, like if you want to do a video and say, yeah, I love this podcast, check it out, and post it, then just add us so we know that you're now entered into the giveaway. So that's the creative part. I'm just giving like a video as a example, but that's how you can participate in the giveaway.
Right. And the creativity can be anything. Steph is, like she said, she's giving an example, but it can be artistic. It can be, a video. It can be whatever you want it to be. You're entered by simply tagging us in your post, your story, whatever, on any social media platform. Then once you're entered, we're then going to also judge creatively. So we're going to pull twice. One is going to be, you just entered. So just by entering, you could win. But then we're going to pull then separately, we're going to put, Steph and I are going to, separately pick I really like this one. This one was really creative. Let's put that person in the hat. And then those that we thought were super creative and cool will then get pulled. And so you have an opportunity to win twice, or you have an opportunity to just win once. And
we want to encourage you guys to do that. I believe that's all for this week. Make sure you share if you care this episode with friends and family. Send them a link to the episode or whatever episode you may enjoy. We greatly appreciate it. And until next time, this is Murder in the Black.